In Mountain Brook, we don't have many buildings over 2 stories. And the elevators keep time. I thank you for returning, some of you, and the new faces. And for a most enjoyable morning. There are those here who will be doing everything I'm doing. And I say that out of having seen it happen. You've heard this saying, all these things that I do, should ye do also. Well, I can remember the days when I ricocheted from one part of the world to another to sit at the feet of someone who supposedly could give me some bit of light, and did, as appearances go, much. Each in his own way made the same statement. These things that I'm doing, you'll do too. And so in a very human way, I can say that many of you here will do all that any teacher you've ever attended, any one of that sort, you will do it too, except better, more thoroughly, more beautifully, more completely, and with more authority. You might put it off and say, no, no. But you'll do it. This morning, the subject was begun. And for those of you who have joined this afternoon, it seems only fair to give you sort of a summation so that you can pick up where we are and can follow through. It's sort of like not fair to hear the last part of a poem or the last half of a concerto or something, whatever it might be. But to hear only half of it isn't fair, so I'll bring you up to date. We started this morning by making the statement that it was important that we understand what the purpose of this gathering is. And it's different. It is not at all the sort of a thing that we've been accustomed to in the past. In the past, usually, we've attended lectures with the idea of, well, it is really the fine thing to do because I am about the business of acquiring truth. Or I am learning a little bit about identity, or whatever the subject might be. And if it was successfully presented, one left feeling a great sense of inspiration and like he was floating and whatnot, and usually with grand agreement if it was something we liked. If I get my was's and wers mixed up, you folks don't mind, because I come from Alabama. Down there, we really mix them up. And so the purpose of this particular gathering, since it would seem to be the goal of all of the philosophies that are idealistic, that I don't know anything about, that I've studied or know about, its goal is a sense of peace. That's the goal of it, the purpose of it. To touch down on one's inmost being and there find what the mystics and the poets and the philosophers have spoken of as the genuine or the real identity or the God identity that one is. Well, okay, our purpose is to do that. Not to inspire, not for the special effects that the motion picture industry is so good in producing. The miracle here, the healing there, the whatever, the dollars, the new job, the new apartment, the new automobile. No. But believe me, the special effects follow peace. Follow that sense of peace. But here, the purpose of this talk is to do it, to touch down on it. And then hopefully, in as we get to the question and answer part of it, I can explain how, for myself, it has been a continuing living. No longer the ebb and flow between serenity and sadness. So that was the purpose of it. Now, by way of continuing review, I pointed out that generally when we attend a lecture, we don't know the position of the speaker. We don't know the position of the speaker. We may think we do. That is, it may be, we would say, well, I am listening to what? A Christian Scientist. And so therefore, being familiar with the philosophy of Christian Science, I could say, well, that position is spoken out from the position of Christian Science. But no longer so. Now it seems that within all of the bodies of metaphysical presentation, mystical presentation, or esoteric presentation, or for that matter even scientific, worldly presentation, there are divisions within them. For example, as a Christian Scientist, who knows? It might be one who is, the new term, a withdrawn from organization, or a non-organizational scientist. It might be, say, a Catholic who is called an innovator, which means usually that he's been excommunicated but has gone right on with the following and people are still listening and so forth. So, or what I'm saying simply is that seldom when we attend a lecture do we know the position of the speaker. And so I went to great lengths this morning to point out what position this one, this image within the awareness that is you, what position it stood. And that's only fair because if you take a book off the library shelf, there's a title. And if it says insects, you know the subject should be insects. If it says geophysical sciences, then that's what the book contains. You know the position of the book by way of its label, announcing itself supposedly honestly. So inasmuch as awareness is in attendance at the moment, and that's what life is, awareness, it's only fair that you know the position of this mirror of within awareness of yourself. And by the way, this is only a mirror of the self I identify as too. I identify as awareness, not this. So I see this too. This is one nearest. This is the only body image whose fingers I can wiggle when I say wiggle, and whose mouth I can say open or close or whatever. It is the nearest body image. This body image, the room, the vision of Everest, or my birds, and Rachel's birds at Woodsong, or the lovely garden at Bill's and David's, all of that's within awareness too. All memories, all thoughts of the past are now within this awareness. Here, I identify as awareness. Now, I want you to know the position then of this image within awareness, like the title of a book, so you'll know the statements that follow. And hopefully all that was said this morning had a predicate. And I just for myself speak of it as a divine predicate. And that is that God, isness, the ineffable, the unnameable, by whatever name you wish to choose to call it, the ineffable is here. The ineffable is all. That the ineffable is being. The warp and woof of this very awareness that is identity. That's a position from which I speak. Then I went on to point out that as has been pointed out for a long time for those who have come to visit at Woodsong or at Lollygog in years past, that I had found for myself a means of communicating that was different, the use of overtones. And by overtones, it's something very simple. I do, after perhaps the Sufi tradition of you people who are students. I simply tell stories, but honest stories, ones I've lived. Therefore, I'm the best teller of that story you've ever heard, because it's my own story and I've lived it, and nobody can do it better. I may not do it eloquently. I may not speak as well as I perhaps could write it, but nonetheless, it is a story I am that I've lived, and I tell it. And then, as I tell one story and another, I found that a synergistic action takes place, something mysterious and strange, but not really mysterious. All you writers here, oh, there's some good ones, and who've written books that you've read today, and were this morning too, know that one story is told if it's sounded clearly and distinctly, and then another is told that follows clearly and distinctly, and if there is a relationship between the two, so that one complements the other, either positively or negatively. Like we said this morning, maybe a loud noise after a soft verse or something. That between the two stories comes a third sound, just like, wow, like that. How's that for a third sound? Thank you. Now let's watch what comes out of the mouth. Comes forth a third sound that is an overtone. Where's the volume control on this? Maybe we should turn it down. Thank you. No sooner asked than done. Now, I have learned that by telling some stories comes an overtone, and we did a few this morning. The ones we did this morning are overtones that don't come about immediately, because it requires the third note of the chord, or sometimes the 6th or the 12th. But I know, after a long time, that it does come forward. For instance, for a young lady whom I hadn't met yet, except in words in a letter, I did 2 stories. Now I know, having done this so many times in the past and having observed it. Lao Tzu was once asked, "How do you know?" And he said, "By observing it so." I told 2 stories. And I know that what will trigger the overtone for those 2 stories will be the first moment that discouragement sets in. Discouragement itself in this tangible arena, people, places, and affairs arena. Now, it's true for all of you. The next time anguish presents itself, you're going to hear an overtone. You may not remember those stories precisely. It makes no difference. You may think of them only peripherally. It makes no difference. It may be you'll think of them subliminally. It makes no difference. You may not even think of them at all. But with discouragement and those tones that were sounded this morning will come forth an overtone. And it will be your own overtone, because it comes forth from within yourself. It comes forth immaculately. And consequently, it's your own. And it's not something that you've read in someone's book. It's not something that you say, I got from my philosophy, from this guru or that teacher or this master or that master. It's your own song. All right. The remainder of the time. That's the review. That's it. I'm going to sound overtones and keep on with them. Can I tell you people, just because it comes to say it, that I love you very much. Now, how can I say such a dumb thing? Because I look out at myself. Why myself? Awareness is that which it perceives. There's no separation between the image and the awareness that perceives the image. There is no value at all in the image. All value, all authority, all power, dominion belong to the ineffable awareness that's doing the perceiving. Therefore, this has no authority and knows nothing you don't. Once upon a time in my affairs, I got a letter. Oh, I get a lot of letters. Don't answer many of them. Because believe me, you're going to touch down on joy today. Now, that is some sense, and it may, but you're going to know it's your own. And you're going to know it's real. And you're going to know that's the beginning, and it's also the end. And that it's where we stay. You will. And I would rather, with all my heart, just abide with that joy, and live it, and be it, and walk the river banks, or sit and watch the leaves fall. There's an art, you know, to watching leaves fall. Oh, there's great grand joy in watching leaves fall, because there's a great message of tremendous proportion. Awareness. That's not the message. But that's a message to it. That's telling me that we've got it up too loud. That must be it. Just turn it down a little bit. Okay, turn it all the way down, all the way to the left, see if it goes off. Okay, I'll quit yelling. I guess I get all enthused up here and I can't help it. And I start yelling, and I'd rather wander around anyway. All right, thank you, I will. Can you hear me all right now anyway? Great, why not? Well, once in my affairs, while I was river banking or leaf watching or fence post sitting or talking to those that would come, those of myself, my awareness self, who would come to say, let's talk about what is. Why do your eyes shine? Why did you write what you've written, or why do you say what you say, or whatever? You've all had the same experience, people coming. Well, I got a letter, and the letter told a story that well, let me put it like this. In looking back, I could remember times of woeful disquiet for myself, of awful anguish, of fear, frustration, as a soldier, as a businessman, as whatever the role was I'm given to play at any given moment. I could think of great anguish in it. And here came a letter that eclipsed any anguish I'd ever felt. Those words told a tale that seemed humanly to be more than anyone could endure. Came the story of a man who said, and I don't mean to disclose confidences, sir, but I'm sure Jim would not mind. Jim, do you mind? This man had not moved a muscle in something like 12 years. He was immobile. He was on his back. He had no one. He had a son, but I think perhaps the son was away, or perhaps the son was very young or something, but in any event, this man could only move his mouth, his tongue, but he had learned to type on a typewriter, and they wheeled a typewriter up, and he wrote a letter to me. And he said, I've just heard about you, and that people come from everywhere, and that you seem to say not guilty with some kind of authority, not guilty of sickness, not guilty of poverty and anguish, not guilty of ignorance, and somehow or other they seem to see it and understand it. And he said, with all my heart, I want some sense of freedom. Again, I'm bound to the bed. Just unplug it, Rachel. Just try unplugging it. There must be a... that's not it. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't see any... Well, yeah, it's totally undone now, but I'll need it later when I can't talk. So let's maybe let the tubes cool off. Anyway, this letter from a gentleman who said that he hadn't moved in a very long time, and I must make a long story short. That gentleman now, I guess he's been maybe 20 years without moving. But this man has discovered a measure of the peace that passeth understanding. He is a light to many. He has a correspondence that goes round the world many times. He is a happy man, and all who are near him feel his happiness and joy in it. That man some years ago said, well, I found the happiness, I found some measure of peace. He said, but I think that it would be grand to not be alone. Now, some years later, Jim has his Cindy. Lovely lady, his wife. The two have a beautiful home. And because it is one of the conditions, I guess, of self-seeking, there is a time in our affairs when it seems that in order to find this centered tranquility, this centered equanimity that peace is, that joy is, we don't find it, it finds us. But in order to do it, it seems that it's necessary to withdraw, to come out and be separate from the world. And at least I took that to mean that I would leave anything to find it. My family, I'd leave it to find it. I would go anywhere there was any promise for it. There was no sacrifice I wasn't willing to make. In India, I had seen that men did this. At a point when they felt it was time to do it, they'd leave their family, go and seek this peace with whomever promised some measure of it. Well, I'm telling this story for two reasons. One, to make the point, and that we can enlarge on later if you like privately, but that one does not have to leave anything to find this peace that one already is. One does not have to leave his business activities, his anything to find it. For myself, I found it, that is, consciously found it. Had found it many times without knowing what it was. But when I thought it was a big thing, when I thought it had to be the road to Damascus experience, when I thought that it had to be something such that all the world was transfigured, and that all of a sudden the leaves would turn on fire, and that matinals of angels would descend to sing hosannas, and when I went through all of that, I thought that it was necessary to leave everything to find just that. But when I finally knew what it was, I found it on a battlefield in Korea. 2, I found it in the midst of business difficulties, fraught with all the anguishes a businessman could have. And I found it also when I had been told that I wouldn't make it, that this was sure to die quickly. So, now the other reason I tell the story is because I love to tell a story that can be confirmed. So you'll know that you don't have some soothsayer or some emotional somebody pulling the heartstrings and strumming his song for self-serving purposes. The man that I spoke of has a son who's here today. Jeff Eccles, in honor of his father Jim. Jeff, I appreciate you being here. Jeff wrote a letter not so long ago, and he said, I have discovered my father. I have seen the beauty and the dignity of this man who smiles against overwhelming odds, who is a bundle of joy. And he said, I want to know his secret too. And I thank you, Jeff, for making the trip. Among the many peregrinations I made, one of the people with whom I studied, until he ran me away, and some of you old-timey Christian scientists will remember Dr. Heinrich DeLong, Dr. DeLong. At this time I was a Christian scientist and he was a teacher, and so I wanted to know, since he seemed to be the most absolute one I could find within the arena, within the philosophy called Christian Science, I wanted to know that. I'd like to read a statement of his that will echo, and you will hear echoes of what was said this morning. The question was asked Dr. DeLonge, what must I do in order to be the Christ? And Dr. DeLonge thought for a minute, and he said, strangely enough, this is something that essentially does not come by way of verbal explanation. It comes rather by acknowledgement. The Christ, or truth, can only understand itself. Therefore, it is self-explanatory. But the Christ truth cannot be explained to something that wants to understand it. That which wants to understand it must melt away and be willing to dissolve in order that the Christ can assert itself. And it will appear as the meeting of that desire. Now what desire? The desire to know what the Christ is, or to be the Christ. Dr. DeLonge went on to say, here is the mystery of godliness that is no mystery to godliness. However, it is an eternal mystery to the personal self, to the personal sense. The best method to be helpful in answering the question, what must I do? What must I do in order to be the Christ? Is by saying, keep your eye single. Know that this isn't difficult to do, but is the very nature of being. That bell is my sweet Rachel's way of telling me it's time to turn tape over. He said the best method to be helpful in answering the question, what must I do in order to be the Christ? Now, by the way, we can substitute that word awareness, if you like. To be, the divine awareness of being, the Christ identity, the only awareness in town, the only awareness that exists, the God awareness. How to be it? To know that this isn't difficult, but is the very nature of us. Realize that you have that I that has not a single quality underived from deity. Rejoice that nothing needs to be changed. Nothing needs to be attained. Rest in the restfulness of I am God's self-awareness. This is the greatest satisfaction and the greatest clarity. That which really is does not want an explanation of how to be itself, since it was never aware of the possibility of such a question. And this, sir, he says, this is your answer. I'd like to just repeat one line of that. That's something which wants to understand the truth, must melt away and be willing to dissolve in order that the truth itself can assert itself. Now, this is not a message peculiar to Christian Science. This is the essence of Zen Buddhism. This is also the essence of Buddhism. This is certainly the essence of Taoism. This is the essence of all the top-down statements. Now, for you folks that have just come in, and to remind those who were here this morning, remember we said there were two ways it appeared, two methods of mentation. The old method, the bottom up, which says this is my awareness, and then we identify as the me who says my, the one who asks questions, the one that wants to know, the one that wants to get smart. And those you find to be 99% of the messages that are ricocheting throughout California and the world. And they're self-serving. They don't get rid of the me who says my. They support it. They hand it ointments. They sharpen its axe so it can wage its battle more vigorously, but it's still chopping trees. It never gets rid of the me who says mine. Then there is the top-down view, basic to all of the original philosophies, at least when they were first stated. And that is to begin as the divine awareness of God. That is to begin with the goal itself. Two ways. But now, mind you, two people doing this appear to both be doing the same thing. They both could be sitting in David's garden, each reading the same book, each interested in the same thing, truth itself. But the one sitting saying, the divine awareness has a book unfolding within itself. Ah, I shall enjoy it, savor it, see what it says, understand it. That's one position. The other one, who is struggling to acquire wisdom, is a me who says my. That one can read the book, read it 1,000 times, 10,000 times, and there's still the me who says, I have read a book 10,000 times, and nothing has been accomplished. Funny, I went up and I shuffled papers so that I might come down and make a coherent presentation, but here I start and there's no way to do anything as I've planned. I would like to read this if I may. I will paraphrase as I go by and hopefully make it better. I would like to preface it by saying this. This has appeared in the tangible arena to be the last teacher for many, many. The last one. Who have from this point on, gone on to make their own statement and appear as teachers for many, many more. And ultimately, something happens within this awareness that comes along to say, awareness is identity. Your own story is the messianic message. Hopefully, I say that to myself. I live it for myself, whether I say it well to that of myself who appears or not. The teacher who best shows how to do something, how to do this. Now we're touched down on the practical aspect of this. The practical, here in the people, places, and things world, so that it doesn't leave us when we get out with the dishes and the business and the world and pick up the evening newspaper